You just wrapped up your freshman year. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you.
What was that whole ordeal like?
First year was really challenging, but I really loved it. Like I loved my first year, even though there were so many challenges. Um, it was honestly really great. I'm really happy with where I decided to commit to. I think it's really the place for me, and yeah.
What made you choose Barnard University?
So it's interesting. I think that my college process was slightly, like, probably a bit different than, let's say, the average. So one thing that happens at the level of higher education is that it's very difficult, in my opinion, to have great access as a differently abled person. Um, and access at the level of higher education is just really hard to come by. That's why. I think that I'm not very represented on college campuses because the access just isn't there. And institutions aren't making an effort to uh, to really be inclusive and to get all their ducks in line and really welcome students of all different abilities. And that was really, really hard during the college process because I had to cross off a lot of schools that were really great options purely for the reason of uh, it wasn't supportive, their campuses weren't accessible, they didn't have very transparent or supportive access or disability services. And so, what it really came down to is who was the most supportive and, or not really most, who was point blank supportive and who could meet my needs, because I knew that if I didn't have access and support throughout my undergraduate degree, I would never make it to graduation. Um, and I think that is very is a very common sentiment. So for me, what was the deciding factor to attend was um, uh, Barnard's accessibility and effort and inclusion, and their accessibility services team is amazing, and I'm really, really happy. But that's not something that was easy to find.
And so this type of support that you're looking for and referring to, did that have more to do with like mental or emotional support or like social support? Like, I'm just curious, what kind of services would those be more geared to?
Yeah, so I think, when we talk about access, it's just about, being able to access your education. So that means access to physical spaces, like the actual campus needs to be accessible. So, that means different things to different people, but generally speaking, ramps, uh, uh, there need to be like ramps and like accessible doorways and stuff like that. So for me, I am a wheelchair user, and
Okay.
so ramps and accessible doorways are really big, and also push buttons on the doors, like really, really big, and just a campus that is easy to navigate and that I feel confident in navigating. Feeling confident in navigating your campus is not a given for a differently able person, or it wasn't a given for me. Like when I was touring all these college campuses, like if I didn't feel like I could keep up or I could, navigate the campus by myself, then that was like a huge problem because I was going to be living by myself in college. So that was definitely a no-no. And then also the other thing, this was very interesting, I think, is when I would go on tours, just like other people, almost all of the schools that I visited had to take me on a separate accessible campus tour. That means I had to go on a tour by myself, right? And so,
What?
like, think about the sort
Wow.
of philosophy of that. Like, if you
Yeah.
need an accessible campus tour, that means that your campus is not accessible, which is a problem. And Barnard was interesting because it was the first time and the only time I had toured with a group of people, and that we were good to go with everybody else, and that I didn't have to take a separate route, which was it was a great thing to seal the deal for me.
Oh, that's
Was that the only school that you like really didn't have to leave the pact?
Yeah, to be honest, really, I mean, it was, and it was also the only institution that I looked at that was very transparent, or maybe it was, top two, but it was the only institution that was very transparent. No other, there's this thing in, um, there's this thing I feel that where you where offices of disability services or or the office of accessibility services at a college or university won't agree to meet with you until you committed. And so every time I would request meetings and would request someone to speak to sort of get a sense of what their attitudes are like, um, and what their approach is, people would say, "Oh, we won't speak to you until you've committed and submitted all your documentation." And Barnard was different. Barnard talked to me when I was an admitted student. And even before that, they talked to me, and they didn't sort of expect me to commit before they were able to have a conversation with me about my needs and what I might need when I would come there, and how they could meet those needs, which was very transparent, and it was like a great sign. And honestly, I just had an amazing feeling. I went for a meeting when I was admitted, and I had a good feeling about it, and so that same day, I committed.
Oh wow,
there you go. That's awesome.
that's an exciting story. I'm just curious. Did you ever think about going international to maybe schools in England?
Oh yeah, I really thought about that for a long time. It was something that I really wanted for a long time. Dream school, obviously Oxford, um, but I decided to stay in the U.S. for undergrad since I really felt that I wanted a liberal arts education. It was something I was really passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you can go to Oxford for graduate, right?
That's the
That's the
dream. That's the dream.
Sick.
That'd be nice. So, what was your actual experience like at Barnard University once you were admitted, and then once classes started and everything? Like, what was that like before, coronavirus?
Oh my god, it was like a whirlwind. It was amazing. Um, I really, really love uh, Barnard. The community is amazing. And then obviously, being a part of the larger university community is just, the icing on the cake, so to speak. It's really great. The level of community and supportiveness that exists at Barnard is something that I'm so grateful for. And the sort of emphasis on social justice and equity and inclusion, and the ways in which we talk about those things on campus, and the ways in which I can talk about um, my own marginalization as a different labeled Jewish immigrant woman, um, and have other people get it. And not get it completely, but kind of have a common language with which to have those conversations is incredible to have for a campus community. Like, I really found that to be an amazing gift.
Yeah, I think just being able to be aware of someone else's circumstance, that in itself is a powerful thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can be tricky because we can never really fully emphasize with someone unless we've lived their experience specifically. So it's not necessarily coming from like a place of like a total empathy, but it's just kind of having a common language and sort of a set of ideals about equity and inclusion that really uh, sort of helps people to um, support each other in moving through a world that maybe marginalizes them in some way. So that's been really, really neat to be able to have those conversations and to be at an institution that places like social justice and like very sort of progressive thought at the center.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I feel like okay, you have to explain this to us because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Barnard is the all girls college that's like connected to Columbia University. But like
Yeah.
Barnard has its own like admissions process and faculty members and stuff. So how does it work with like Barnard and Columbia? Because they're right next to each other, aren't they?
Yeah. So um, the four school relationship is, we call it the four school relationships because actually Columbia has four schools. One of them is Barnard. Um, and it can be quite complicated getting into the nitty gritty. But I would say from like a student perspective, there is no difference. Um, like uh, we take classes together, like all of our classes are open to everyone at all four undergraduate schools, so we all register at the same time for classes across the four schools. So it's not like people stay at Barnard. And although Barnard technically has its own faculty, Barnard professors do teach at Columbia. And so uh, that's kind of a yes and a no, because I think they both teach on opposite side, on both sides of the street.
Okay. Yeah.
And students take classes on both sides of the street. We eat the same. We eat the same food in the dining halls. We use the same libraries. We're in the same clubs. We're in the same athletic consortium. Barnard athletes compete on Columbia athletics teams, but we also attend the same commencement, and our degrees are conferred by Columbia University president, President Bollinger. So it's really, honestly, there's more similarities than there are differences. From like a student life perspective, there really is no difference. Like, I have friends on both sides of the street, and it's very integrated.
Interesting.
And so is Barnard like the housing area? Is that like the commonality that people have when they go to Barnard? Is that's like the dorms or the areas that they live in? Or do Barnard students live like all over campus?
So Barnard students can live at Columbia, and Columbia students can live at Barnard through the Barnard Columbia Housing Exchange. Um, but all first years live on the Barnard Quad. But other than that, I think you can have the freedom to choose through the housing exchange, you have to apply where you want to live. I think the sort of main difference is Barnard's history as a historically women's college.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they have separate endowments, so the finances are separate. Um, and as you noted as well, they do have technically a separate faculty. Um, and a separate like board of trustees and everything like that. But generally speaking, when it comes down to like student life and student experience, the difference isn't like there isn't like a you know oh, you're a Barnard student, like we have access to all the same things, and as do students at Columbia.
So where does the all women's like component, where does that play into your experience at the college at university?
Honestly, I was looking at attending a historically women's college. Like it was like a really, it wasn't a requirement for me because obviously my need for access was kind of a bigger need, but it was like something I really wanted. Like if I could make it work to go to a historically women's college, so I was looking at the Seven Sisters primarily. So that's Barnard, Wellesley,
Mm-hmm.
Bryn Mawr, so on and so forth. Um, so that's something I came into the college process really wanting, and that's because I felt that historically women's colleges had a great reputation for producing great leaders. Like it's very like empowering. Um, it's a very sort of affirming space, and women's colleges, because of the nature of their founding, right? They're kind of these institutions of education that were were created because someone or a group of people believed that a woman deserved an education that equivocated that of a man. And for the time period that Barnard was created in, and for the period of time that Barnard was created in, and that similar women's colleges were also created in, that was a very like progressive ideal. And so I feel that because of that sort of founding on progressive ideals, women's colleges, specifically Barnard, has really maintained that lean towards being really progressive. Obviously, they're not perfect. No, nobody can be, but the emphasis on inclusion and social justice, and just kind of talking about structures in society that are created to like oppress us and how we can change that, is something that is like unique to historically women's colleges, I feel, or that's what I felt in the application process.
And are you finding that to be true? Like, are you really like coming home and being like, oh, like Barnard is such like a wonderful place. Like I really like it. Like, are you really enjoying your time there?
Or is it overhyped?
I am really enjoying my time there. That's not to say that there aren't things that are frustrating or that could be worked on. Barnard isn't perfect. I feel that when I came into Barnard, I kind of had this kind of vision of it being kind of a liberal utopia, uh, and it is not a utopia. No institution is perfect. But I have really loved my time at Barnard nevertheless, and have felt really supported, particularly like within the larger kind of network of Columbia. Um, I feel like Columbia is much less nurturing, and they're definitely like I've definitely experienced a lot of like trouble and hassle, um, feeling included and having the access that I deserve on that side of the street. Even like you can tell from like the structure, right? Columbia is much less accessible, and accessibility on Columbia's campus is like a really like it's a really sore point for me, and so it's definitely like it's really great to be able to go back to the supportiveness of Barnard, you know, every day, and to be able to sort of feel empowered to, conquer the challenges on the opposite side of the street because, particularly like, neither Barnard or Columbia are perfect, but I think Columbia has given me way more grief uh, than Barnard has as a differently abled woman, um, to try to navigate the campus, and that type of stuff. So it's